banks are a tremendous danger. They are all heads of a criminal organization. Danger. 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 Democratic states are deterioration. The democratic equality before the law is something completely incompatible with the idea of one universal law applying to every person in exactly the same way. Everyone can become king. Everyone can become king. Everyone can become king, so to speak. So to speak. So to speak. So to speak. It exists in the form of the difference between a higher public law that applies to public officials and a lower private law that applies to regular folks. Under democracy, everyone is equal insofar as entry into government is open to all on equal terms. If as a private person, I simply take your money out of your wallet, this is considered to be a criminal offense and I will be punished. If as a public official I come to you and do exactly the same thing, this falls under public law, is considered to be a legal activity. So to speak. If as a private law I take you and beat you up and force you to work for me day and night, this would be considered kidnapping, slavery and whatever, and is of course a great offense. If I do that as a public official, then it is called public service, military draft, and things like this is perfectly alright. Everyone can engage in theft and live off stolen loot if only he becomes a public official.
Hey, welcome back to the No Way Jose podcast. We're on to part 21 of a live reading of Democracy, the God That Failed. Let's go ahead and bring in our guest, Toad. What is up, my friend? How are you?
What's up? I'm doing all right. How are you?
Doing good. We're in the weirdly. I think I've noticed we're in this weird time capsule with this series. So just to give an update for those, regardless of when you watch this. Currently, the going-ons. We're, the last episode, I think we chatted about the Epstein stuff a little bit. We're still there. I believe we are at the quintupling down of there's nothing to see here. Ignore this. No one in the base is buying it, aside from the most shilliest of shills. And I don't know, all this crazy stuff I talked about last episode. It legit is it's getting wild. So we'll see where things go.
Again,
yeah,
because nobody buys that the files don't exist at all. So now it's changed again, where now it's a Democrat hoax. The files do exist, but it's a hoax,
and we don't know why anybody even cares about this. It's a Democrat hoax. Some waffling between that or some combo of that, and I don't even get why you guys care about this thing. So that's where we're at with that. So I find it interesting, especially as we're wrapping up near the end of the series. The 2 chapters we have left is on essentially how you would take care of your defense if there wasn't a government. And the next chapter after this is what's the deal with revolution, essentially. So we'll get into all that and more.
What must be done, I think, in the final chapter.
Yeah. So, with that though, here we are. We are in chapter 12 on government and the private production of defense. So, I'll go ahead and I guess start it off.
Yeah.
It says, It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's from the Declaration of Independence. Part 1. It says, among the most popular and consequential beliefs of our age is the belief in collective security. Nothing less significant than legitimacy of the modern state rests on this belief. I will demonstrate that the idea of collective security is a myth that provides no justification for the modern state, and that all security is and must be private. First off, I will present a two-step reconstruction of the myth of collective security, and at each step raise a few theoretical concerns. The myth of collective security can also be called the Hobbesian myth. Thomas Hobbes and countless political philosophers and economists after him argue that in the state of nature, men would constantly be at each other's throats. Homo homini lupus est, put in modern jargon, in the state of nature, a permanent underproduction of security would prevail. Each individual left to his own devices and provisions would spend too little on his own defense, resulting in permanent interpersonal warfare. The solution to this presumably intolerable situation, according to Hobbes and his followers, is the establishment of a state. In order to institute peaceful cooperation among themselves, two individuals, A and B, require a third independent party, S, an ultimate judge and peacemaker. However, this third party, S, is not just another individual, and the good provided by S, that of security, is, oh, by the way, that mumbling I did there actually says of in the book. Does it say that in yours too?
It does, yeah.
Okay, so there we go. We found a little typo. It wasn't me being an idiot.
Yep.
Okay, that totally threw us off. My bad. It's not just another private good. Rather, S is a sovereign and has as such two unique powers. On the one hand, S can insist that his subjects A and B not seek protection from anyone but him. That is, S is a compulsory territorial monopolist of protection. On the other hand, S can determine unilaterally how much A and B must spend on their own security. That is, S has the power to impose taxes in order to provide security collectively. Any thoughts as of yet, Toad?
Yeah, kind of a lot. I mean,
yeah.
So he mentioned private production of defense in the previous chapter as sort of as something that is ignored basically by the errors of classical liberalism, or classical liberalism sort of is talking about, well, you have to be able to protect your property somehow. So how do you do that? And then it winds up being this tendency towards government. And he's sort of putting it in this chapter here. He just kind of put it in the perspective of Hobbes, I guess, where Hobbes basically was taking the line that, well, humans are just going to fight with each other by default, which is counter to what Hoppe thinks, because Hoppe says the opposite with his argumentation ethics, where he would tell you that people actually sort of inherently understand property rights in a way because they will actually argue before they will violate each other's property by aggressing against it, or, like you're going to argue with somebody before you like punch them in the face, pretty much, unless you're black, I guess, in this day and age. But yeah, so I mean, a lot of thoughts going through my mind. I don't know. I might be a little bit all over the place here, a little bit schizo here. And I mean, those are kind of the main thoughts that kind of went through my mind here. He's about to talk about, like, how can you, because obviously you do need to protect your own property, and he's about to talk about, well, how do you do that through private means and not by establishing a government? Because obviously if you, like, humans essentially, they always have it, and I would agree that humans do have a tendency to actually create a government, even though I don't think that runs in opposition to his argumentation ethics. I think it's just that people want property security, and that's just kind of what their mind thinks about. Well, that means we need some arbitrator must have some sort of power, like, to be able to not necessarily protect that property, but to arbitrate like a dispute over property between two people, which is what he's getting at here. He's about to say, how can you do this through private means?
Exactly.
Right. And he's,
because they're not wrong. This does need to get done. There does need to be arbitration. There is conflict resolution is an issue that we are going to have. So, and this is the tired trope of, like, essentially this is the heart of the government argument. Like, how do you deal with conflict resolution? Like, if you have a conflict, if party A, party B, you have issue, who settles it? because it is, it's like the Hobbesian thing that he's like coming back to. Everyone's in a state of nature. We're all at war with each other. So there needs to be some sort of ultimate authority. But I think that's a jump in logic that is undue. That we assume it needs to be an ultimate authority. There's still ways for it to be voluntary. There are methods to. I mean, yes, a third party may become necessary, but there are ways in order to manage certain things. That it doesn't need to you necessarily give away all your whatever your sovereignty over to another individual, essentially.
Right. So you do need somebody to be able to have that role and arbitrate those disputes. I think it actually is the human tendency to think about that as well. This needs to be like some sort of government figure, which of course he would say is somebody that is going to tax you for that. So they're something that shouldn't exist. They're violating your property by doing that. And he's about to tell us, well, how can you accomplish this without that being the case? And he is going to lay this out in this chapter here. And I assume it's going to have something to do with both people A and B here who are involved in the dispute. They both will come to some sort of agreement that we both agree that this guy is going to be the guy who settles our dispute for us. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's going to be something along those lines. Like by some private means, everybody's going to agree to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Oh. All right. There is little use in quarreling over whether man is as bad and wolf-like as Hobbes supposes or not, except to note that Hobbes' thesis obviously cannot mean that man is driven only and exclusively by aggressive instincts. If this were the case, mankind would have died out long ago. The fact that he did not demonstrates that man also possesses reason and is capable of constraining his natural impulses. The quarrel is only with the Hobbesian solution. Given man's nature as a rational animal, is the proposed solution to the problem of insecurity. Wow, where did I lost my place there.
Problem of insecurity and improvement.
And improvement. Can the institution of a state reduce aggressive behavior and promote peaceful cooperation and thus provide for better private security and protection? The difficulties with Hobbes' argument are obvious. For one, regardless of how bad men are, S, whether king, dictator, or elected president, is still one of them. Man's nature is not transformed upon becoming S. Yet how can there be better protection for A and B if S must tax them in order to provide it? Is there not a contradiction within the very construction of S as an expropriating property protector? In fact, is this not exactly what is also and more appropriately referred to as a protection racket? To be sure, S will make peace between A and B, but only so that he himself can rob both of them more profitably. Surely S is better protected, but the more he is protected, the less A and B are protected from attacks by S. Collective security, it would seem, is not better private security. Rather, it is the private security of the state, S, achieved through the expropriation, i.e. the economic disarmament of its subjects. Further, statists from Thomas Hobbes to James Buchanan have argued that a protective state S would come about as the result of some sort of constitutional contract. Yet who in his right mind would agree to a contract that allowed one's protector to determine unilaterally and irrevocably the sum that the protected must pay for his protection? The fact is, no one ever has.
All right, I do want to point out that what we're kind of getting at, this whole concept of like A and B have conflict, and I think people have this idea of like, well, you need someone to settle it, and so that doesn't mean that they necessarily have to give up their abilities entirely. He gives the point of like this idea of like the state of nature of man is essentially, like, he's pointing to the Hobbes, like the state of nature for man is like conflict. And the point that he's driving at here is like, no, because essentially throughout this book we've talked about how that's a decivilizing force, and essentially even just from an evolutionary perspective or civilizational perspective, we simply just would not have been able to get to this point if we as individuals were not able to come to some sort of realization that it is better to interact, whenever there is conflict, to find a way to resolve it without diminishing each other or one or the other, essentially take what is either win-loses or lose-loses and turn those into win-wins. This is essentially what we're talking about with economics. Essentially find ways to make this work for everybody to where we both come away from something with a W here. So that's all voluntary. You don't need another person, and that is now. You may think like, hey, whatever the way to resolve whatever given issue we're dealing with, some conflict, property rights, whatever, maybe we do need to outsource this decision to somebody. That's because you separate you guys together for whatever reason value this person's judgment, or there's some way that through some voluntary means they've leveraged the XYZ, whatever. I mean, read like Chaos Theory by like Bob Murphy, and goes all the different ways that like this could be managed through like insurance companies and the like. But the point is, you don't necessarily need to outsource. And the idea that like just because it's a conflict resolution, this should be some outside logic thing that like this one thing is the outside thing that we will give up our rights entirely and go just for this thing, like, oh, yep, right. As opposed to, I mean, the idea that like you could make agreements that like, hey, I will agree to whatever so-and-so agrees on this because I value their opinion. That doesn't necessarily, point being is you don't have to give up your agency. There's ways to go about this without having to create some sort of sovereign individual that no one can go against, essentially.
Yeah, well, he's saying again, which he said in the previous chapter as well, that if you're like arbitration entity or whoever this person is, if that person is like a state and they're violating your property, they're taxing you, whatever, they're forcefully taxing you, you don't have any say over that, then how can they be a property protector? Because they are actually violating your property rights by doing that. So it's hypocritical on its face. So he is pointing that out again. He did also sort of go after Hobbes a little bit here by basically saying that Hobbes, like, his solution makes no sense, because if he's saying that all men are going to be in a constant state of dispute like this, then how can you have another man who is still a human like everybody else? How can that other man be like an arbitrator over this? So that doesn't make sense. So he's sort of contradicting himself there. So that was another point that Hoppe made in there. And I mean, those are basically my thoughts. I don't know if I had another thought in here or not, but he did also refer to like if you have some entity that is like taxing you basically or extorting you for money to protect you, basically. That's like what the mafia does, right? So he's sort of equating government's solution to that to a mafia solution to that. Although I would argue the mafia is actually better than that, because they're more localized and you know who they are, so you can kind of hold them accountable a little bit more. So I'd rather have the mafia expropriating me for protection than having the government.
Well, people don't think the mafia is justified, so they actually have to justify their existence by providing an actual good of some sort.
Yeah. The mafia actually provided protection.
Yeah, exactly.
when they did that, yeah.
Yeah, you didn't mess with those restaurants. You didn't mess with those people if they were protected by them.
Right.
I mean, it may have been a silly protection racket to begin with, but at the very least, it's like they did know whenever a time came, you don't mess with these people. So
yeah. Yeah, and he did bring up the social contract again. Like, if you have a taxing entity that is providing your property, well, you didn't agree to that, because he's going to be making the point that you have to have some arbitrator that both people in this dispute are going to agree to all these terms, whatever, and that has not happened here, because nobody has actually agreed to this. There is no, social contract. Nobody has signed an agreement to have this government taxing them. So
exactly.
All right. Let me interrupt my discussion and return to the reconstruction of the Hobbesian myth. Once it is assumed that in order to institute peaceful cooperation between A and B, it is necessary to have a state S, a twofold conclusion follows. If more than one state exists, S1, S2, S3, then just as there can presumably be no peace among A and B without S, so can there be no peace between the states S1, S2, and S3, as long as they remain in a state of nature, i.e. a state of anarchy, with regard to each other. Consequently, in order to achieve universal peace, political centralization, unification, and ultimately the establishment of a single world government are necessary. Yeah, so he's now sort of bringing this up a level and saying that, well, you might have multiple states involved as well, which I think he would probably say is actually sort of a better case that you have. It's better that you have multiple than one if you're able to kind of choose one state over another because maybe they have better
Well,
rules about their taxation about how
if
they
you
arbitrate or whatever.
if you take it to the logical conclusion, it's the idea that you have to keep outsourcing the conflict to some other person, until you reach some ultimate authority, some god on earth or whatever, who is the ultimate sovereign of sovereigns. So it is essentially, this is taken to its logical end. It's like a one world government.
Right. He's saying,
the
problem is that the states would also be in conflict with each other, and then the solution to that would be to unify and become a centralized government, which is the opposite of what you want. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. It is useful to indicate what can be taken as non-controversial. To begin with, the argument is correct as far as it goes. The premise is correct. If the premise is correct, then the consequence spelled out does follow. As well, the empirical assumptions involved in the Hobbesian account appear at first glance to be borne out by the facts. It is true that states are constantly at war with each other, and a historical tendency toward political centralization and global rule does appear to be occurring. Quarrels rise only with the explanation of this fact and tendency, and the classification of a single unified world state as an improvement in the provision of private security and protection. There appears to be an empirical anomaly for which the Hobbesian argument cannot account. The reason for the warring among different states, S1, S2, and S3, according to Hobbes, is that they are in a state of anarchy vis-a-vis each other. However, before the arrival of a single world state, not only are S1, S2, and S3 in a state of anarchy relative to each other, but in fact, every subject of one state is in a state of anarchy vis-a-vis every subject of any other state. Accordingly, just as much war and aggression should exist between the private citizens of various states as between different states. Empirically, however, this is not so. The private dealings between foreigners appear to be significantly less warlike than the dealings between different governments, nor does this seem surprising. After all, a state agent S, in contrast to every one of its subjects, can rely on domestic taxation in the conduct of his foreign affairs. Given his natural human aggressiveness, is it not obvious that S will be more brazen and aggressive in his conduct toward foreigners if he can externalize the costs of such behavior onto others? Surely, I would be willing to take greater risks and engage in more provocation and aggression if I could make others pay for it. And surely there would be a tendency of one state, one protection racket, to want to expand its territorial protection monopoly at the expense of other states, and thus bring about world government as the ultimate result of interstate competition. But how is this an improvement in the provision of private security and protection? The opposite seems to be the case. The world state is the winner of all wars and the last surviving protection racket. Doesn't this make it particularly dangerous? Will not the physical power of any single world government be overwhelming as compared to that of any one of its individual subjects? So it's a long paragraph on that one.
I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about before, that this is more of just taking it to its ultimate ends where it kind of goes. He's just kind of elaborating on that more. I don't know if you have more commentary on that. I mean, it was an interesting way to put it, but I think he kind of said it all. I don't know if you have anything there.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, he's talking about if you have warring states, there's going to be a tendency towards centralization again, which he's saying does seem to exist in the current world right now. And, well, he's comparing I think the most interesting part of that is that he was comparing individual citizens to the state, where basically the state has so much power that they're going to be able to do way more damage, essentially, right?
Yeah.
The state can have this huge military, so the state can do a lot more aggression against another state than individual citizens will. And individual citizens, a lot of them are not even going to want to be at war because, again, as Hoppe will point out, that's not the actual human natural tendency. Like, your tendency is going to want to avoid that. So
yeah. I mean, I guess that's the... sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But, like, how they put it with the, in a math form, they made S the sovereign, and they kind of made the point in the beginning of this. So the S does have a slight incentive against the other two as well. So, if this, given this theory of we're all in a state of conflict with each other, and so therefore it needs a sovereign, and it goes on from there, outsourcing. So it is, that baked into this assumption is that the sovereign is also to some extent in conflict with you. So you're just by this slowly making a bigger and bigger and bigger. So even by this, the theory of the Hobbesian theory of we're all in a state of conflict with each other, you're still better off to abolish all governments, because essentially you're creating the ultimate ungodly fucking, blip, make the world, the universe disappear type shit, because that's the level of threat that you will make, essentially. Yeah.
Basically, I was going to point out that, like, I think individuals are going to have way less of a tendency to want to be, like, at war with other individuals, even individuals of another country or whatever. And Rothbard actually makes these points in For New Liberty, I believe, which he also talks about private defense as well in that book. But he talks about war. Actually, was it in that Rothbard book, or was it in this book, Hoppe? Or maybe they both talk about. I think Hoppe actually points it out in this book, but they might both point it out. The fact that, like, especially if you go back in history to, like, well, Hoppe definitely talks about it during, like, the era of monarchies or whatever, where there was a distinct separation between the state and its people, and its people were not even going to war. The states were warring against each other, but the people were, like, out of it.
That's what the whole thing with feudal stuff was. Like, you always see all these old movies or, like, lords and this and that. It's like, yeah, they characterize as, like, they terrorize these poor peasants, and, like, they're lording over them, and it's like this neo-feudalism. But with that came responsibility. Like, when wartime came, like, you as the lord of the king, given this large fiefdom, you had your knights below you, and now those knights, while those knights are given land and all sorts of nice things, well, with that comes, like, hey, well, bitch, when we calling you, let's fucking go. Like, that's what that means. So. Yeah. I mean, with all that land and stuff came responsibility, and obviously that's unjust as well, but compared to what, compared to the system now, so.
Right, so yeah, the system now, obviously, because it blurs the line between the ruling class and the ruled class, then it's also blurring the line between who winds up being involved in the wars, which is worse. And he did also sort of point out that there could be an interstate conflict if you have an individual from one state causing some conflict against some individual of another state, which we do see that now too, right? Like, if a citizen of some country goes to some other country and, like, murders somebody or something, it sort of becomes this international issue. You know what I mean? That has to be resolved. So the states have a conflict to resolve in that case. So he's pointing out that is something that happens as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get into the next part. Part 2. Let me pause in my abstract theoretical considerations to take a brief look at the empirical evidence bearing on the issue at hand. As noted at the outset, the myth of collective security is as widespread as it is consequential. I am not aware of any survey on this matter, but I would venture to predict that the Hobbesian myth is accepted more or less unquestioningly by over 90% of the adult population, that a state is indispensable for protection and defense. However, to believe something does not make it true. Rather, if what one believes is false, one's actions will lead to failure. What about the evidence? Does it support Hobbes and his followers, or does it confirm the opposite anarchist fears and contentions? Obviously, I'm think he's about to start listing some examples, but before we get into that, I don't know, any thoughts? You want to give any sort of summary of what you just said there, Toad, or anything of the like before? Because obviously I think we're about to list some examples. So,
I mean, basically he's just talking about Hobbes, again, implying that you do need a government to resolve these disputes, and he's saying that even though the vast majority of people will agree with that, they're actually not correct.
Yeah.
So obviously we know that the vast majority is not always correct, which is also a point throughout this book, and that's why democracy doesn't work. So,
yeah. The U.S. was explicitly founded as a protective state a la Hobbes. Let me quote to this effect from Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Here we have it. The U.S. government was instituted to fulfill one and only one task, the protection of life and property. Thus, it should provide the perfect example for judging the validity of the Hobbesian claim as to the status of states as protectors. After more than 2 centuries of protective statism, what is the status of our protection and peaceful human cooperation? Was the American experiment in protective statism a success?
No.
You want to say something?
No.
Yeah, he's going to use us as an example because we are he is right. We are the prime Hobbesian example of, like, hey, this is very much, if you read our founding documents, it couldn't be. I mean, obviously, you'd say, oh, well, we don't do that. But yeah, that's the point here. Like, what becomes of something like this? So an institution founded on this concept, where is it likely to fall apart to?
Right. Well, as he's pointed out, because the government is essentially, it's going to have to check itself. It's not going to have a tendency to actually do that, obviously, as we have seen this real-life example of it in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I always kind of go back to how in the Declaration of Independence, or I guess, was it the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution? I forget where the consent of the governed line is. Maybe it's in the Declaration. But that became really sort of the problem, right? I mean, one of the problems, at least. The consent of the governed, like maybe you had the consent of them initially, but you can never have the consent of every single person, for one thing. But also, that's sort of that, it's the social contract again, right? Like you're saying, well, the consent of the governed, but do you actually have that? Has everybody actually signed, like, yes, I do consent to this government? No, and especially not now. And of course, way back then, probably more people agreed with that. Like, yeah, let's try this. This sounds like a good idea. Now, I mean, certainly not. So, yeah, so that concept is not playing out either.
100%. According to the pronouncements of our state rulers and their intellectual bodyguards, of whom there are more than ever before, we are better protected and then more secure than ever. We are supposedly protected from global warming and cooling, from the extinction of animals and plants, from the abuses of husbands and wives, parents and employers, from poverty, disease, disaster, ignorance, prejudice, racism, sexism, homophobia, and countless other public enemies and dangers. In fact, however, matters are strikingly different. In order to provide us with all this protection, the state managers expropriate more than 40% of the incomes of private producers year in and year out. Government debt and liabilities have increased uninterruptedly, thus increasing the need for future expropriations. Owing the substitution of government paper money for gold, financial insecurity has increased sharply, and we are continually robbed through currency depreciation. Every detail of private life, property, trade, and contract is regulated by ever higher mountains of laws. We call these legislation, thereby creating permanent legal uncertainty and moral hazard. In particular, we have been gradually stripped of the right to exclusion implied in the very concept of private property. As sellers, we cannot sell to, and as buyers, we cannot buy from whoever we wish. And as members of associations, we are not permitted to enter into whatever restrictive covenant we believe to be mutually beneficial. As Americans, we must accept immigrants we do not want as our neighbors. As teachers, we cannot get rid of ill-behaved students. As employers, we are stuck with incompetent or destructive employees. As landlords, we are forced to cope with bad tenants. As bankers and insurers, we are not allowed to avoid bad risks. As restaurant or bar owners, we must accommodate unwelcome customers. And as members of private associations, we are compelled to accept individuals and actions in violation of our own rules and restrictions. In short, the more the state has increased its expenditures on social security and public safety, the more our public property rights have been eroded. The more our property has been expropriated, confiscated, destroyed, or depreciated, and the more we have been deprived of the very foundation of all protection: economic independence, financial strength, and personal wealth. The path of every president and practically every member of Congress is littered with hundreds of thousands of nameless victims of personal economic ruin, financial bankruptcy, emergency, impoverishment, despair, hardship, and frustration. All right, before I move on, any thoughts? I mean, that went. I feel like that paragraph went hard as fuck. So that's why I read it in the way I did. So Hoppe was dropping bars there.
Well, it's a long paragraph, but he is kind of just pointing out a lot of specific examples of how the government is violating your property rights now. I mean, the whole point of that paragraph is basically, the American experiment has not worked, and the more that the government claims that they protect you, and they make up, all these fears, which he listed out: global warming, homophobia. We have to protect you from all this shit. So we need to take more money from you to do that, because we're going to provide protection.
They've made all these highfalutin ones. Meanwhile, one of the most basic of things, like, I don't know, don't cheese ravioli our children.
Yeah.
They can't even handle that, and they
There
try
you
to
go.
ignore that and focus on, oh well, the environment's warming up or cooling down, or don't
Right.
worry about the cheese ravioli. Yeah.
Right, but they're not even protecting you from any of this other bullshit either, because most of
Exactly.
it like doesn't even really even exist. So they're just making that shit up as an excuse to
Yes,
get more
because
money
as we've
from
said
you.
before, the idea is
Yeah.
government is incentivized to essentially ask for as much capital as can be to produce it, for the production of security. But essentially, it's also incentivized to give you the least amount of security possible. So you just end up with a diminishing product more and more and more. Essentially, a diminishing product an ever diminishing product that continually costs more ever and ever and ever. That is the government. That is everything about the government. It starts off with this idea of like this poison pill of like, oh, this might be better. Maybe there is some little thing they sell you that is better, but slowly it gets worse and worse and worse in every fucking way possible. So
Yeah, and you're less and less protected against the government as it claims
Yeah.
to be protecting you more. You're less protected against it, and probably against actual threats as well, as we're seeing right now. Like you're less and less protected against people that are just maybe going to shoot you on the street or whatever. I mean, we just see increasing violence everywhere. I mean, he also pointed out the gold standard going away and fiat currency, and how that, how the currency is just being depreciated by constant money printing. So he points that out as well. And then he just goes over a lot of different ways of how, with the government in place, you're actually not allowed to associate or disassociate with people as you wish. And gave a bunch of examples of that.
all right. The picture appears even bleaker when we consider foreign affairs. Seldom during its entire history has the continental U.S. been territorially attacked by any foreign army. Pearl Harbor was a result of preceding U.S. provocation. Yet the U.S. has the distinction of having had a government that declared war against a large part of its own population and engaged in the wanton murder of hundreds of thousands of its own citizens. Moreover, while the relations between American citizens and foreigners do not appear to be unusually contentious, almost from its very beginnings, the U.S. government relentlessly pursued aggressive expansionism. Beginning from the Spanish-American War, reaching a peak in World War I and World War II, and continuing to the present, the U.S. government has become entangled in hundreds of foreign conflicts and risen to the rank of the world's dominant imperialist power. Thus, nearly every president since the turn of the century has also been responsible for the murder, killing, or starvation of countless innocent foreigners all over the world. In short, while we have become more helpless, impoverished, threatened, and insecure, the U.S. government has become ever more brazen and aggressive. In the name of national security, it defends us, equipped with enormous stockpiles of weapons of aggression and mass destruction, by bullying ever new Hitlers, big or small, and all suspected Hitlerite sympathizers anywhere and everywhere outside of the territory of the U.S. The empirical evidence thus seems clear. The belief in a protective state appears to be a patent error, and the American experiment in protective statism a complete failure. The U.S. government does not protect us. To the contrary, there exists no greater danger to our life, property, and prosperity than the U.S. government. And the U.S. president in particular is the world's single most threatening and armed danger, capable of ruining everyone who opposes him and destroying the entire globe. And right now, he has loads of cheese ravioli, probably all over him.
Yeah, they really like that Italian food there. So
That's a reference to previous episode, CR. I'm trying not to hit the censors here.
Yeah.
You know the contentious thing that Donald Trump is caught up in. Fill in the blanks, audience. Go on.
They know
Toad.
what CR is. They can go back and watch the episode prior to this one.
Yes,
Where
that's our
came
code
up with-
word now.
I came up with that. Yeah,
Cheese ravioli, CR. All right, bud.
it's similar to cheese pizza, but it's in person.
Yeah.
So that paragraph, I mean, he is now specifically talking about, well, the government is going to stoke all this fear about like foreign nations, basically to allow them to take more of your money to protect you against all these nations that aren't even actually a threat, and use that as an excuse to go to war and all these situations here. And he pointed out that the only time that U.S. soil even got attacked when he wrote this book was Pearl Harbor, which was the result of the U.S. provoking Japan in the Pacific theater.
Yeah,
And
like
of course,
embargoed their oil
yeah.
or some shit, right? Yeah.
I forget exactly. I mean, I think it was a lot of it. I think was just that the U.S. was sort of advancing militarily, like over there as well. So there was a lot going on. I don't know the specifics of it, but yeah, that happened. And then, of course, a little bit. Well, I don't know if hilarious is the right word, but this book was written like right before 9/11, I think, or shortly before it. So 9/11 happened like right after this, which you would consider to be an attack, on U.S. soil from a foreign entity, I suppose, Israel. Yeah, so, I mean, and it applies, the same logic applies to 9/11 as well. Like they're going to, obviously we saw that. I mean, we all know that. They're going to use that to stoke more and more fear. Oh, it was Iraq that did this. Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. We got to go in there. We got to go into Afghanistan because Osama might be in there right now. All that crap. So, I mean, he's referring to all that. I mean, it's basically evergreen stuff there. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that was basically what I was going to say about that.
Yeah, we don't have much commentary so far. This little essay, I feel like it's been written a little bit different. I don't know if he was just I think Hoppe was in the spirit when he was writing this one. He was like, I'm gonna fuck these people up real quick. That's where he was at. So whereas the previous essays have been more dry, and so we've had to give it a little bit more commentary. Whereas if anything, I've been like, all right, I gotta get my inflections right. I gotta deliver this right. It's more about the Hoppe's words. He's saying it all earlier.
I think in the last chapter he just said a lot more that was pertinent in fewer words. Like it was like jam packed. It was dense.
Yeah, so then we had to like explain it to our retard audience.
Like this, he's like listing like a whole shit ton of property violations. Like we don't have to list every single one of these.
Exactly.
On that previous page there.
All right, on to you, buddy. Part 3 or
Yeah.
Section 3, whatever.
Statists react much like socialists when faced with the dismal economic performance of the Soviet Union and its satellites. They do not necessarily deny the disappointing facts, but they try to argue them away by claiming that these facts are the result of a systematic discrepancy, deviancy between real and ideal or true statism, respectively socialism. To this day, socialists claim that true socialism has not been refuted by the empirical evidence, and that everything would have turned out well and unparalleled prosperity would have resulted if only Trotsky's or Bukharin's, or better still, their very own brand of socialism rather than Stalin's, had been implemented. Similarly, statists interpret all seemingly contradictory evidence as only accidental. If only some other president had come to power at this or that turn in history, or if only everything would have turned out beautifully, or if only this or that constitutional, if only this or that constitutional change or amendment had been adopted, everything would have turned out beautifully, and unparalleled security and peace would have resulted. Indeed, this may still happen in the future if their own policies are employed.
We'll get them next time.
Yeah.
It's the the Arrested Development, the swinging thing or whatever, where he's like, this never works. And, it was like, how does this work? It's like, every single time they always say it's gonna work, and it never works out. And he's like, but maybe this time.
I don't even remember that exactly. You're talking about was that Tobias?
Yeah, it was Tobias.
Yeah.
I think it's actually in our buddy Tyler's intro. Or maybe he's used it as a drop for sure before, but it's like it's them like pursuing swinging in their relationship. And that's them being
been
like
a while for
it
me.
never works for anybody. It's like it always destroys every relationship. But he's like, but maybe for us, just this time. Anyways, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything to really say about that particular paragraph, but I mean, the previous paragraph was sort of just him summing up that the U.S. experiment didn't really work. Government grew,
But
and then in this
maybe
paragraph,
this time.
yeah, in this paragraph, it was just that the Soviet Union collapsed, and the socialists will tell you, it wasn't actually socialism. So socialism still works, man. That just wasn't it. Like that's basically what they'll say. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We have learned from Ludwig von Mises how to respond to the socialist evasion immunization strategy. As long as the defining characteristic, the essence of socialism, i.e. the absence of the private ownership of factors of production, remains in place, no reform will still be of any help. The idea of a socialist economy is a contradiction in terms, and the claim that socialism represents a higher, more efficient mode of social production is absurd. In order to reach one's own ends efficiently and without waste within the framework of an exchange economy based on division of labor, it is necessary that one engage in monetary calculation, cost accounting. Everywhere outside the system of a primitive, self-sufficient single household economy, monetary calculation is the sole tool of rational and efficient action. Only by comparing inputs and outputs arithmetically in terms of a common medium of exchange, money, can a person determine whether his actions are successful or not. In distinct contrast, socialism means to have no economy, no economizing at all, because under these conditions, monetary calculation and cost accounting is impossible by definition. If no private property in factors of production exists, then no prices for any production factor exists. Hence, it is impossible to determine whether or not they are employed economically. Accordingly, socialism is not a higher mode of production, but rather economic chaos and regression to primitivism. Whew, all right. I had some shadows getting in the way there. I got to do something with my mic, I think, here. But yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot there. I mean, you're just kind of bringing up the socialist idea of like the cost accounting problem. I forget. What is it, Mises always? There's a catchier term for it. The silver bullet of fucking the cost something, whatever the fuck. But anyways, there's differing theories. People use different terms. Essentially, the idea is that they're not able to account for cost because you don't have a free back and you essentially don't have a free market, and that's kind of at its core any sort of even the idea of a government
it's the calculation problem.
Yeah, the calculation problem. Yeah, there. So, but yeah, he's just bringing that up. Essentially, the idea of the government providing defense. That at its end is socialized defense. So he's So he's kind of going, and the silver bullet issue of socializing anything is you can't account for costs. This is kind of our point before that we're getting at, that like you throw off costs. That's what we're describing when we're saying that you're fucking up the incentives. You're incentivizing it to provide less without like an opposite, like cost is that opposing force. Like because you're being coerced because someone has a fucking gun to your head and is like, this is how much it costs. That makes is a much different scenario than I have a choice of 4 different vendors and I get to choose between their wares and at varying qualities and varying costs and to make the applicable choice. And from there, a market is created. So these are very different phenomenons that we're experiencing.
Right. So if the government owns the means of production, which is what the definition of socialism is, then that industry or whatever no longer really cares about like what is the cost that we have involved to actually make this thing. So your prices are going to be all thrown off by that because of course the government just steals your money, so they don't care about what it costs. They can just take more and more, and that's going to cause these prices to increase generally. And then the calculation problem happens because you no longer have a free market. That business is no longer actually operating as a private entity, so they don't really care like what costs are involved in that anymore, so they can kind of just price it however they want, which of course we really see this in like socialized medicine and things like that, where everything is completely distorted and fucked up. Like, why does everything cost this much? Why is it like this? Well, yeah, I mean, it's socialism.
Yeah. All right, I'll take this to the end, since this last paragraph kind of leaks into it's barely on this and leaks into the next one, which is the whole page. How to respond to the statist evasion strategy has been explained by Murray and Rothbard. But Rothbard's lesson, while equally simple and clear and of even more momentous implications, has remained to this day far less known and appreciated. So long as the defining characteristic, the essence of a state, remains in place, he explained, no reform, whether of personnel or constitutional, will be of any avail. Given the principle of government, judicial monopoly, and the power to tax, any notion of limiting its power and safeguarding individual life and property is illusory. Under monopolistic auspices, the price of justice and protection must rise and its quality must fall. A tax-funded protection agency is contradiction in terms and will lead to ever more taxes and less protection, even if a government limited its activities exclusively to the protection of pre-existing property rights, as every protective state is supposed to do. The further question of how much security to provide would arise. motivated, like everyone else, by self-interest in the disutility of labor, but with a unique power to tax, a government's answer will invariably be the same: to maximize expenditures on protection, and almost all of a nation's wealth can conceivably be consumed by the cost of protection, and at the same time to minimize the production of protection. Furthermore, a judicial monopoly must lead to a deterioration in the quality of justice and protection. If one can only appeal to government for justice and protection will be perverted in favor of government, constitutions and supreme courts notwithstanding. After all, constitutions and supreme courts are state constitutions and courts, and whatever limitations to government action they might contain is determined by agents of the very institution under consideration. Accordingly, the definition of property and protection will continually be altered and the range of jurisdiction expanded to the government's advantage. Any thoughts before we bring this to the end, Toad? On that one, that was dense too.
Yeah, I mean, he's reiterating some of the points that he's made already, which, like the point where if you have the government is in control of protection, then the incentives are going to be such that, because the government is, again, stealing your tax money to provide this protection, the incentives are going to be to actually provide less protection to justify them taking more money from you. So that's how the incentives line up. So he's making that point again. And then he did also point out again that you have like this document like the Constitution that is supposed to restrain government, but if the government is also interpreting that same document that's supposed to restrain them, well, they're not going to restrain themselves, right? If they get to interpret it any way they want. And he's saying that that is also going to be the case with like government courts, essentially. Like if you have a dispute that's being settled in a government court, the tendency is going to be to favor the government. Like, how difficult it is to go up against like the state, in a court battle. It's ridiculous. So he's making all those points there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hence, Rothbard pointed out it follows that just as socialism cannot be reformed but must be abolished in order to achieve prosperity, so can the institution of the state not be reformed but must be abolished in order to achieve justice and protection. Defense in the free society, including such defense services to person and property as police protection and judicial findings, Rothbard concluded, would therefore have to be supplied by people or firms who gained their revenue voluntarily rather than by coercion, and B, did not, as the state does, arrogate to themselves a compulsory monopoly of police or judicial protection. Defense firms would have to be as freely competitive and as non-coercive against non-invaders as all other suppliers of goods and services on the free market. Defense services, like all other services, would be marketable and marketable only. That is, every private property owner would be able to partake of the advantages of the division of labor and seek better protection of his property than that afforded through self-defense by cooperation with other owners and their property. Anyone could buy from, sell to, or otherwise contract with anyone else concerning protective and judicial services, and one could at any time unilaterally discontinue any such cooperation with others and fall back on self-reliant defense or change one's protective affiliations. And that's what we'll bring it to an end for today. Any thoughts where we ended at, Toad, before we get out of here?
Yeah, so again, the point comes up that if you have government controlling the production of defense, again, then basically you can't reform it in such a way that it will actually be incentivized to actually produce that, right? Like he's basically saying that, he said that in the previous paragraph too, I think, where basically regardless of who's in charge, like, we just need a different leader here. Like the Soviet Union just needed a different leader or whatever. Well, no, it's the system that's the problem. Although I would argue that, if you put Ron Paul in as president, I would argue that would be different. I've sort of evolved my thinking on that, but generally, yes. The system is what it is, and it is a failure. The government cannot actually provide.
Well, we won't argue about that here, Toad.
Yeah, okay. You would go with you'd allow Ron Paul to be the dictator as well, probably.
Oh yeah, I'd prefer that. I thought the sounds
prefer
like
that
saying.
over what we have now.
Yeah. I'd prefer it, but if the idea is if someone was like, let's elect Ron Paul next year, I'd be like, What? Have you not been paying attention? What the fuck are you talking about? But
Well,
like,
no, I mean, obviously
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
going to happen. I'm just saying that as just
Yeah, if you could just wave a wand, sure.
right, just for I'm saying it, rhetorically, basically for a thought experiment. And then he is starting to talk about if you have like competing agencies, private agencies that can provide protection for you, that is a system where it's more like a free market and people would be able to actually choose, I want this agency being my protection agency, which I think he's probably going to get more into in the next part of this chapter, I would imagine.
100%. We're just getting into the meat of it.
Right. So
we're like a little under a third of the way into this chapter for those who are wondering where we're at. So in this chapter being on how to provide defense essentially in a private system. The privatized defense is what we're talking about here. So when we're not even a third, we're essentially 3 out of 10. We're 3/10 of the way through this essentially. So, but yeah. But Toad, where can people find you at? And we'll do this again soon for sure.
Yeah, Learn to Toad on Twitter. I have the Better Off Dead podcast, BETTOR, which I'm on YouTube, audio platforms. I have an Instagram for that as well. That is my suicidal sports betting show. I'm on a little bit of a break right now during the Major League Baseball All-Star break. There's not a whole lot going on until Friday. I'll be back doing full episodes on that again. And Covered in Uke is my ukulele YouTube channel as well, which I'm getting that going. I'm building that more. So, and patreon.com/learn-to-toad. I will be actually putting content on there soon, which is mostly going to be Uke stuff behind the paywall. So look out for all that.
Hell yeah, dude. Maybe one of these days Tower Gang will ride again. But till then, if you want to support what I'm doing, make sure to go support what Toad's doing as well. If any of that stuff appeals to you, which it should, except for the gambling thing. Don't be a degenerate. But make sure to get subscribe and leave a like. I don't know, help a brother out. But if you want to support what I'm doing, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. All of those things go a long way. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose. If you do want to help me in the best way you really can, you can do that with money. I like money. Give me that money over at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. The lowest level is $2. That gives you access to the early episodes. I do about 2 of those or so a week, give or take. I keep about 4 of the so behind the paywall at any given time. So it's weeks of paywalled content. You also get access to an ad-free RSS feed. You also get access to a Telegram. You also get access to the pre-show and priority for the call-ins on me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on both of our platforms. The highest level of my Patreon is my sponsors, and I give them a big shout out every episode because I love them and I appreciate the support. For one, my previous co-host on Tower Gang, who is with me, who also already just plugged his shit, but once again, at Learn to Toad, go give him a follow, at AbrogateDees, at ZOVRECK, at _InfantZeal, Tim Tuttle, at Jolyon Klebold, the homie, Will Bell, Delicious Blueberry Rabbit Eye Wine, big fan of the show, Torin May, then at Wayne, WAYNE, Taculus, and then Jordan Peterson. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. We'll be back with another one of these soon. Love you all. Bye-bye.
Peace.